Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the HawksZone Rundown. I know we've been on here quite a bit over the last few days here. We're giving you guys constant updates on what's going on with the Seattle Seahawks and their free agency period here. But tonight's show, going to be a little bit more of the same, but this time I've got guest Chris Cluff joining me. Chris Cluff has the CHAWK TALK blog and website up. It's on Twitter as well. You can find him there, as well as a guy that's written a couple different books on the Seattle Seahawks throughout his time. Titles such as Zorn Said to Largent and The Good, Bad, and the Ugly of the Seattle Seahawks. Both those books are on Amazon, so you guys can go down and purchase them below. They'll be in the link in the description below. But tonight's show, we're going to kind of kick it off with the first wave of free agency, get Chris's thoughts on what this new era in Seattle will look like now that we've moved on from such stars such as Geno, DK, Tyler Lockett. We'll also talk about John Schneider's future and how does this offseason really play into that. And then, as always, we'll get to your guys' viewer Q&As at near the end of the show. Guys, remember, when it comes to this, please, super chats get priority, but everyone, please get your comments in there. We love interacting with you guys throughout the show. As well, guys, make sure to subscribe, like the show. Click the notification button so that way you guys are always notified when we go live or we have new shows that come out. We'll have a new show coming out later tomorrow, which was recorded with Dana O'Gorman from the Our Turf Football podcast that we talked about yesterday. And Dana gave us some great insight into the Seahawks defense and what's got her excited about the future direction of this team. So with that being said, guys, we'll get into this.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me.
Yeah, let's go. It's go time, baby.
Here comes Geno. Steps up, takes that shot to the end zone. It is Metcalf. 20.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You about to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Off me.
Nobody in the world can do it.
Are you kidding me? Trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Jackson Smith is Jigba. The circus music moves in. Throws it forward. Oh my goodness, he caught it up by Leonard Williams.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
Well, Chris, welcome back to the HawksZone Rundown.
Thanks for having me again, Bryce. It's always good to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting show. I'm really looking forward to getting your opinions on what's going on in Seattle. Obviously, there's been quite a few moves that have taken place since we were on here last with you, kind of towards the end of the season and kind of setting up what we thought this offseason may look like. Little bit different than what we maybe envisioned, but some of the stuff you did talk to us early on was actually accurate with how this team may go through the rest of this free agency period. So with that being said, Chris, let's get into it. First wave of free agency. There's the legal tampering period. There was the scouting combine, and now we're starting to see deals come through. What's been your kind of impression of who Seattle's re-signed and the contracts they were able to re-sign, Jaron Reed and Ernest Jones at? And then obviously the guys they brought in Sam Darnold, now today, MVS and DeMarcus Lawrence. What is your take on this direction of Seattle and the way that this free agency is going so far?
Well, first of all, I think the direction took a turn that they maybe weren't planning for when both Geno Smith and DK asked for trades, a day apart. So I'm not sure that that's what they initially had on their offseason plan here. They talked a lot about how they expected Geno to be their quarterback, and they were trying to get a deal done with him, but he just wanted more money than they felt he was worth. So in the end, they had to part company, and it's a good thing that Pete Carroll came back to the NFL, because I'm not sure whether they would have actually had a trade market or much of a trade market at all for him if Pete hadn't come back and now be the coach of the Raiders. So that should work out just great for Geno, being back with Pete, who really they have a good bond there. And the Seahawks are moving on with a guy who's 7 years younger and a lot cheaper. And it's a similar deal where it's just kind of, let's see what else comes along. Let's see, maybe Sam Darnold becomes the guy. Maybe if he continues the ascension that he started last year, there's no saying that he has to just be a short-term, so-called bridge quarterback, as everyone likes to say. He could maybe develop into their longer-term answer at quarterback. So that's the direction they're going now. I mean, obviously, no one really saw all of this happening the way it has, but and then you look at DK Metcalf trade, him off to Pittsburgh now, and they're just kind of just filling in the blanks right now with MVS and just kind of, trying to build up their offense for this year. And obviously they'll be building long-term through the draft and such, but that's kind of how they do it.
The thing that's interesting to me, we'll get to each guy individually, but with Geno, do you think this happens if Pete Carroll doesn't come back? Do you think if he wasn't in Vegas that Geno probably would still be the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks?
That's a good question. And like I said, I feel like the trade part of it might not have been there. I'm not sure what other teams would have been interested in trading for Geno, because there was no interest in trading for him last year. So I'm not sure if Pete wasn't here back in the NFL, if there would be this year. But he wanted so much money, and maybe he didn't. The word is he didn't respond to the Seahawks offer, and maybe that's because he was just ready to leave, and he knew. Maybe his agent had already talked to the Raiders at the combine, and there's all that stuff kind of happens at the combine. Like all this stuff, the groundwork is laid. So maybe he already knew that Pete Carroll wanted to trade for him, and that there was a report that the Raiders did approach the Seahawks about possibly trading for Geno, and they said no, we're trying to extend him. So and then later it came out that then when talks were breaking down between both. DK and Geno with the Seahawks, that they offered both those guys apparently for Max Crosby, which the Raiders quickly laughed off, and everybody else who read that laughed it too. But hey, you got to try, right? You take your shot when you can. But so I think like some of this was maybe laid, and Geno knew that he could get to the Raiders, and so he just forced his way there. Otherwise, no, I think that maybe there would have I think Pete Carroll maybe had a huge say in these negotiations, right? And that if not for him, maybe the negotiations would have gotten into the middle ground, and he would still be the quarterback of the Seahawks. So, and I had written something on my blog early when Pete was first hired that he could really spice up this offseason. And that was one of the ideas I threw out there, which is kind of an easy link to make, but it ended up happening. So there you go.
Yeah, I know that's kind of how I felt with it too, was I feel that middle ground got missed on this because of the fact you now had the option of Geno going to the one coach who he has a fantastic relationship with, that truly believed in him, gave him the opportunity to start again, and, gets to go to a place where he gets to play indoors, which he loves to do, and gets to go potentially make his last big chunk of money before his career clock kind of runs out here in the next 6 years. Now, switching and pivoting over to DK, the DK one was more interesting to me because I thought for sure they may have had DK play out this last year at worst case, until I heard John Schneider kind of talk on his show he does on 710 last week, before this all kind of transpired with DK, where he said the worst case outcome is that we have a freak of a receiver playing for us in 2025. And when he used the term worst case, to me, that was kind of like has the organization now decided that they really want to get DK out of town and get what they can for him now and then move in a different direction? Like, I really would like to know like how those talks really deteriorated, because I never got the vibe things were that bad this year for DK, but the fact that these contract negotiations just deteriorated so quickly leads me to wonder if there were some things going on behind the scenes that we just aren't aware of yet.
There's always that possibility of other things that people aren't aware of. And that happens a lot, I'm sure. And sometimes these things kind of leak out and we get a fuller picture of things, but sometimes it's just basic. I think in both cases for Geno and DK, it was just about money. I mean, DK Metcalf went to a team, it was reported that there were the four things that he wanted, right? Whether they're all true or not. He wanted obviously to be paid, but he also wanted to go to a contending team that had a stable quarterback situation and warm weather. Now, people have since sort of debunked, or at least one report debunked the warm weather thing, but he ended up in Pittsburgh, which doesn't have warm weather, currently does not have a quarterback, and is no more a contender than the Seahawks are. So really, what did he go there for? Money. He went there for the contract. So I think that's all it really boiled down to, is the Seahawks didn't want to pay him $30 million a year on his second veteran extension, and that's just where it ended up going. And he kind of probably saw that, and then that's why he asked for his trade, because he saw the handwriting on the wall for his case.
So now with that all kind of being said, we've kind of gone through that. That was like the first little bit of free agency. We got hit with those in that legal tampering period. Obviously, Tyler's release was in there too, which we all kind of saw coming. I saw that coming last offseason with the way the contract was structured. Didn't make it any easier because to me, Tyler's probably the closest we've had to and you'd know this better than me, to a Steve Largent type player / receiver in Seattle since Largent's retirement. And for me, it was just, I was really excited when they decided to do it. Hey, this is going to be Tyler's day. Like, we're going to get to celebrate Tyler Lockett. And then obviously we didn't get to do that because all the DK stuff came out and then Geno. And it's kind of all snowballed to, oh, right, Tyler isn't part of this anymore. And that's a big thing for this receiving core, considering you've now lost two of your top weapons in it. Yes, JSN's still there and he's ascending, but you lost two of your staples that were in it this offseason. So what do you think the impact of losing Tyler is going to be like for this team?
I think Tyler was always a great leader, a great citizen, great in the locker room. Everybody loved him. There was not a single person who didn't like Tyler Lockett, both on the team and off the team. I mean, he's an all-time Seahawk, without question, all-time Seahawk. He spent 10 years here. I mean, that's unheard of. Look around the NFL, like Mike Evans with the Bucks, right? Is maybe one of the few receivers who has actually lasted a full decade with his original franchise. Everybody else gets traded, moves on, whatever. So, kudos to Tyler Lockett for going that long. I would say this about his performance on the field in recent years. He just kind of lost his. He was kind of banged up, and he was when he caught the ball, he typically would just get right down. You'd see him roll on the ground really fast. That was kind of his MO. That's what it had become. And so I think the Seahawks saw that. He lost the big play abilities that he had. I mean, it makes sense. He's been around for 10 years, so he's in his 30s now, and you start to lose some of those great skills that you had when you were in your 20s at that point. So I think this was always, like you said, the handwriting was always on the wall because he had one of the top 3 cap hits, I think, in the NFL for wide receivers, coming into this season or last season. So he was highly paid and too highly paid. And it was when you saw how much money they were going to get back against this year's cap, $17 million, that's a no-brainer considering what you weren't getting from him anymore. Even if you thought that maybe you could get more than what Ryan Grubb got out of him last year because they really didn't go to him a lot, maybe you thought, this year maybe more, but not at that price. And, some people want to, let's address this right now. Some fans are like, oh, maybe he'll come back, because the Seahawks now traded DK. No, that's not how they do it. When they say goodbye to somebody, they say a public goodbye to somebody, they do not bring them back. They might bring back guys later, like Bobby Wagner came back after playing with the Rams, but that's a pretty rare thing because typically they move on from the guy and that's the end. And Tyler's toward the end of his career, so he won't be back until he comes back to be in the Ring of Honor. That's or signs a one day I'm retiring with the Seahawks sort of contract, that kind of thing, but not on the field. He won't be back.
Well, and that's the kind of interesting thing with the Tyler thing for me, and I'm in total agreement with you. I do not see them bringing him back. I also wonder too, you look at, I thought for sure once free agency kind of started that, he was going to be gone to the Raiders almost as soon as he got released because they released him early. He could have signed. I assumed he was already going to be there and be in the Raiders organization. And it makes me wonder if he's not going to be one of those guys that maybe towards the end of training camp gets signed, doesn't have to go through the whole process. Pete brings him in because he knows Tyler's going to be in shape and ready to go. Or he's one of those guys that gets signed for a late season playoff push. And, that'll be the interesting because I know he runs a very successful real estate business in Seattle. And it's something definitely where I think Tyler's going to make Seattle his home permanently after his playing career is done. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for Tyler Lockett. But obviously, like you said, it's kind of unheard of for a guy to play 10 years in one city. And again, have such a good love from the city consistently throughout without any sort of hiccups along the way. I can't remember ever seeing a Tyler Lockett, oh, he's too dramatic, or oh, Tyler was just the consummate professional all the time. And it's nice that he did get his send-off. The one thing for me, we can kind of talk into this now. So they've obviously gone out and signed Sam Darnold. They gave him a very team-friendly deal almost, it seems like, for him. Yes, there's quite a bit of money in it, but when you look at how it's structurally broken, it's very Seahawk-friendly in this and gives him room to still max out a lot of it and potentially get another contract. They've gone and signed MVS. They brought in a swing tackle in Josh Jones. And then today they went out and got what I thought was a need for them. They went out and got a good run-setting edge defender in DeMarcus Lawrence. He's not the pass rusher he once was, but I think he is an upgrade on what they envisioned Draymond Jones's job to be. And basically, from what I understand, a much cheaper contract than people initially, when they see the number come out, to what it actually is. It's basically a 2-year deal for $18 million rather than it being this 3-year, $42 million deal that everyone kind of initially was like, wow, that's quite a bit of money for an aging player. It looks like a very favorable signing for Seattle where they're going to get, you're going to have DeMarcus Lawrence on this line, Byron Murphy. They brought back Jaron Reed at a good number and someone that I wanted them to bring back this offseason because I still think he's playing good football. And Leonard Williams, and then they signed Ernest Jones to what looked like a really good deal as well. This defense has the makings to really start the year fast and be a top 10 unit throughout the year. Don't you think, Chris?
Yeah, top 5. They really by the end of last season they ranked 10th pretty much. They were the 11th scoring defense. They were 10th in EPA. They were 10th in DVOA. So a lot of those efficiency measures that we judge defenses by these days. By the end of this last season, they were basically the 10th best defense in the NFL. So I see them this year top 5 defense in the NFL. And adding DeMarcus Lawrence, like you said, exactly everything you just said. He is a strong run defender. He still has that ability. And so I think he's going to be an early down edge guy for them who let's get teams into a passing scenario right off the bat. Let's shut down the run, and I think this defense is really solid. Ernest Jones, that was like the number one thing John Schneider had to do other than offensive line was get Ernest Jones back, and he did that. And then they just made their defense better today with DeMarcus Lawrence. So the only thing to me they're missing, and I say this to you guys, I think every time I'm on the show, is a nose tackle. And you get that nose tackle in the middle, and you will dominate. If you get the guy who can eat 2 people at one time, everybody else feasts, and this defense will go everywhere Mike McDonald wants to go. And I guarantee you who wants that nose tackle. So it's just a matter of where they find it. The draft probably, but that's the only thing that's missing.
Speaking of that, actually, one of our listeners here and MWM comes in with add Kenneth Grant at the draft to the D-line and wow, Hawks opponents next year are in trouble. I really would love to see Kenneth Grant if that's pick 18 for them. I think that's a great pick because it frees up Byron Murphy. It frees up Jaron Reed from certain roles. And Kenneth Grant, I think, is one of the few potential blue chip players in this very limited class when it comes to true first round talent. I think Kenneth Grant would be a great pick. So thank you, FWM, for that. But yeah, I totally agree. That's the one thing we said that's been missing. It really hasn't been filled since Brandon Mebane. Mebane was our last true guy that could play that one tech spot so well in that nose tech, or zero tech, I should say, so well in Seattle's defense. And they recycled guys through, whether it's, Alan Branch and these different guys they brought through. It's never really been the same. And that's where, for me, I look at it and I kind of go, that would be an ideal situation. You get a player like that in the draft and you're able to solidify this defensive front and make it truly a nightmare for teams to deal with. What did you think of the MVS signing? I think it's a great deal based on the length, the contract. He comes in with a skill set that, again, I think they're going to try and rebuild a bit of DK in the aggregate, as they say, where you get the speed factor. And that's why I look at it from MVS. He's going to be your kind of home run over the top hitter in this offense. And again, this offense is very dedicated and set up because I studied the hell out of this offense. I love this Bill Walsh offense. Your receivers have to be better route runners in this offense than physically gifted players like DK. They have to be able to run the backside dig, the high crosser, and the corner route. Those are big staples in this offense. Those weren't big things that DK did well. DK got 7 routes like that all year. I think that may have been part of it too, maybe in those conversations for DK where this is how we want to use you. These are the routes we want to use you on. Doesn't fit. I want to go run the post. I want to run the go. I want to run the routes I'm comfortable with. and that might have led to some of the discussions breaking down. But what are your thoughts of the MVS signing?
Yeah, I agree with you. He's a deep ball guy, and you need that because you got JSN who can work the short and the intermediates, and also he can get open deep too. But JSN's kind of like Tyler Lockett was to me. Like they're very similar players, their body type and the way they move, the way they can get open, and so JSN is unquestionably the number one here now, and MVS is going to just be over on that other side, and they're going to add another. They might add another veteran. Or through the draft, they will continue to upgrade this receiving core, and you'll end up with a solid looking core, and it might be somewhat temporary. MVS obviously just a 1-year deal, but JSN is your number one guy, and we'll see what they add to it if they draft a guy maybe in the first or second round to really load up the talent there. We'll see what they do going forward, but there's more that they will do obviously for that. And I think MVS is just a piece that Clint Kubiak was comfortable with from they were together with the Saints last season, only for 8 games. But in those 8 games, he averaged like 22 yards per catch, and he scored 4 touchdowns. He was making big plays left and right, and that's what he's brought here to do, so that they have some variety in their passing game and some multiplicity in their passing game.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, too, with this new system that they're going to with Kubiak. There isn't a lot of 11 personnel. Your third weapon in this really is your tight end. So it's a lot of 2 receiver set stuff with your 2 tight ends, a lot of your 12 personnel, which means that those targets that we saw go to the third receiver in Seattle last year in Ryan Grubb's system that was very 11 personnel based are going to go to their tight ends. Whether Noah Fant's still here, I still think he's potentially a cap casualty at some point throughout this process. But that's A.J. Barner. I think they're going to draft a tight end potentially and bring them into the fold as well, because this tight end group is so deep in the draft this year that you can get a good tight end in the third round and have him come in and be a potential impact player. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how the remainder of this free agency period goes for Seattle. What are your thoughts, though? And I'm going to ask you this because it's on every Seattle Seahawks fan's mind. This first wave of free agency, the legal tampering period is hit. They were very much in the discussion for Will Fries from the Colts, and obviously things didn't go the way. Sounds like Seattle was very much on, we want to get you in for a physical. We want to look at your broken leg. They didn't want to do that on Fries' side of it, so he went and signed his deal for 5 years at $88 million with Minnesota, and now everyone in Seattle is panicking because we haven't addressed the O-line. What is your take on this whole O-line situation in free agency, especially not looking to the draft yet? We'll touch on that in a minute, but what is your whole view on the class that came out this year in free agency on the offensive line, and how does it really fit to what Seattle is looking to do there? And is Seattle more banking on their in-house talent currently than they are on what's out in the free agent market?
Yeah, so to look at what the free agency class looked like, it's typically pretty thin, and it was this year because teams lock up their good guys. They're going to keep their good linemen. And John Schneider always talks about it. There's a dearth of good offensive linemen. It's hard to find them. That's why Chicago traded for 2, and there's Laramie Tunsil was traded as well. So you've had some trades happen, and teams are finding different ways and whatever way they can to upgrade their lines. And the Seahawks, to their credit, it sounds like they were very much willing to pay Will Fries for $17 million a year, it sounds like, and they just couldn't get him in, and he wanted to get a deal done fast, according to that report. So, which is understandable. Like, why would you go have a physical when another team's just going to sign you sight unseen? And I don't think that 5-year $88 million is full on. That's the actual contract. It's probably a 3-year contract. But however it breaks down, he did get $34 million guaranteed, I believe. And that was another question, was how much guaranteed money were the Seahawks offering? But clearly they wanted to see him before they did anything. So they were trying. They gave it a good effort on that one. So it just comes down to who do they get? They really need to get a veteran left guard in there. You can't just go in with the same guys that you had and then hope you find something in the draft that helps you out. So they're going to have to sign somebody. They're getting down to the much older guys or guys that have different kind of flaws. They clearly don't seem interested in signing a center because they could have had Ryan Kelly for cheap or Josh Myers for cheap, and they didn't do either one of those things. So they seem comfortable with their center situation. So it really comes down to left guard. So we know that they're trying to do something there. So they'll probably just end up with a much cheaper guy than the one they were really targeting as their first option. And then it comes to the draft. And so then you're looking at is Tyler Booker there from Alabama in the first round. I know they're going to have, there's going to be 3, 4, 5 different guys that all the different fans are split on who they want in the first round. But that just comes down to who actually is there when the Seahawks are picking. And maybe none of the guys they really wanted 18 are there and they end up trading down, even though they already have a bunch of picks. Or maybe they trade up because they do have two twos and 2 3s. So they could move up a bit to get a guy that they really want. If it's Booker or somebody else or a quarterback if they want Jackson Dart, something like that. So we'll see what they do in the draft. But I think that because they have so many options with draft picks, I think they're probably going to just get a fill in 1 year left guard like they often do, and then draft. And hopefully they draft in the first 2 rounds a really talented guy who they can just plug in there, because you need to add talent. Like they have a whole bunch of day 3 guys right now that are on their roster. They have a first round left tackle. They have a 3rd round right tackle. That's great. But in the middle, it's all rounds 4, 5, 6. Christian Haynes is a 3 who could barely get on the field. So you've got to upgrade your talent. And coaching can take you so far, but every time that you get a new coaching staff, all the talk is, oh yeah, this offensive line is going to get better because they got a good offensive line coach. We heard it when the Shane Waldron came from the Rams and brought his own O-line coach. We heard it last year. We're hearing it again this year. Like I never bank on that. You need talent in the NFL. So and most of the best offensive lines in the NFL this past season, they had at least 2 or 3 guys who were drafted in the 1st or 2nd round on their offensive lines. So that's what you need. You need a couple of those guys. So that hopefully they'll do that this year and put some higher draft capital into their offensive line.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping for too as well, Chris, is I hope that they use at least 3 of their, top 500 picks that they've got on the trenches, probably 1 on the defensive side, whether it's a Kenneth Grant type or an edge player, and then 1 on and 2 on the other side being on this interior offensive line, whether it's you take a guy that's a tackle guard projection, like a Donovan Jackson that can play guard for you. And then if something doesn't work with Abe Lucas or Charles Cross, you can kick him out. And then also take a guy like a Tate Ratledge, who is truly a guard and, can go and play right away. Because I am holding out a little bit of hope for Christian Haynes, because I do think a lot of his struggles potentially last year were due to scheme and what Ryan Grubb wanted to run, where he really did have a good zone blocking grade coming out of UConn. And I think maybe a year in an actual NFL weight room and understanding what it is to be a pro might help him. I'm not holding out that he turns into a top 5 guard, but if at least he can elevate himself to being a consistent starting guard, whether that's on the right side, and then you can bring in one of these guys, and maybe even, like you said, maybe Tevin Jenkins is someone that Seattle does sign and bring in as a veteran left guard, that, then you don't have to play one of these rookies right away. So, but with that being said, let's kind of pivot this discussion into the new era that is currently in Seattle. So we talked about Geno and DK and them all moving on. Well, now we've got the biggest part of this replacement is Clint Kubiak in this offensive scheme and the new quarterback that we have in Seattle here in Sam Darnold. What did you think of when Seattle signed Sam Darnold and the contract? And then also, like, what is your view of Sam Darnold versus a comparison on Geno Smith and what you're giving up in Geno and him moving on now and how you're now pivoting to Sam? Do you see a big drop off for Seattle, or do you see something of a comparable level of play that can still keep Seattle in that conversation of potentially fighting for the division and getting into the playoffs?
Based on how Sam played last year with the Vikings, I feel like he's at least what we had in Geno, and if he continues that ascension, if he takes that next step. The last couple of years, he's been in really well coached situations on offense. He was in Kyle Shanahan's offense with San Francisco in 2023, and then he went to Minnesota, where He had good coaching there as well. And both these schemes are kind of, McVay, Shanahan, that they all come from the same original tree, just like there's different branches of it. So moving over, he knows this offense from being with San Francisco, and Kubiak was there at the same time. So they have the crossover there. So you're looking at a connection that already exists there. And it's just about building on what he did last year. And that's the hope, clearly, that he can sustain and build on what he did with Minnesota and become that for the Seahawks. So then comparing him to Geno, to answer that part of your question, I feel like Geno Smith, my opinion of Geno Smith, is kind of in the middle of where all the extremes are. There are so many people who love him and think he was doing everything more than he needed to, and he was a superhero for the Seahawks. And there are people who think he was just the trash quarterback. Clearly, he's not either one of those things. He was a quarterback who, just like most quarterbacks, needs support. And they didn't have a lot of offensive line support for him, which is typical for this franchise over the last decade. But they really needed, if he had I was really interested in seeing what would happen if they had built up this offensive line to make it a better level of competition, and see what happens with this great defense they're going to have next season, and see if Geno could actually win playoff games. I was super curious to see if he could win playoff games, because to me, he's a very solid quarterback. He obviously has a lot of fourth quarter comebacks under his belt. And there are times when things are going right, everything's good. But last year, so many things went wrong. They had a horrible play caller who he was just overmatched every game. The defensive coordinators were just killing Ryan Grubb because he had no experience in the NFL. And then on top of that, you had a ridiculous interior offensive line where you're just relying on these day three guys who most of them had never played before. So that's just a recipe for disaster. And Geno just crumbled under that a lot of times. And he really did not play great in some games, and he threw some bad interceptions. And are they all his fault? No. But in the end, the quarterback is the one who has to raise his game. And some people thought he did. Other people thought he didn't. It was clear that there were some games where the Rams game in particular, where he was kind of the mostly at fault. And then there were other games where he was just at the mercy of what was going on. So that's my take on Geno Smith, is he didn't have a lot of support that he needed in the 3 years that he started here. He was a very serviceable quarterback, but they obviously didn't win enough games and win any playoff games. So now you're looking at Sam Darnold to come in and be at least what Geno was, if not better, but also let's give him that support that Geno didn't get. Can we get that for him? And we know we have the defense. Like Mike McDonald rebuilt and fixed the defense last season. It's going to be a top 5 defense in 2025. So if you can get the offense to at least average or in that 10 to 15 range, you can get into the playoffs and win playoff games. And I guarantee that's what Mike McDonald's looking at. And that's why he brought in a whole staff that knows each other. And that's his new offensive staff. They all have worked together at different times. They all are very familiar and in sync. And that's he wants to grow from there so that he hits the ground running, so to speak.
It was interesting today on 710. They had Matt Hasselback on the Brock and Salk show, and he was talking about Sam Darnold, and he said he sees a lot of himself in his career of what he did in Seattle, and then also what he did in Seattle when he was at Green Bay in Sam, and that Sam wasn't really ready to play when he was in New York. He wasn't really ready to play in Carolina, and then he went and kind of reevaluated and took that year in San Francisco to kind of learn how to play quarterback, because it's not that Sam Darnold is deprived of talent. He is a very talented quarterback. There's a reason he was picked number 3 overall in his draft class. Wasn't because, we're just going to take a flyer on this dude. Like, teams thought he was legitimately a franchise quarterback. And that's why for me, when they made this, just, had to pivot off of Geno and go in a direction, the only one that made any sense to me really was Sam Darnold. If you wanted to reset your quarterback room with some multi-year stability, where you're not just, okay, I'm going to go get an Aaron Rodgers, or I'm going to go get a Kirk Cousins and, bank on him for 1 year and then draft a guy, and then hopefully that guy comes in and plays, especially with this quarterback draft class where it is very much not an elite prospect class. To me, it seems more of a competitive starters class where you can get guys in the mid rounds. If you let them develop for a few years, you will get a starter potentially out of them. And I'm not saying a top 5 guy. I'm saying a guy that's between top 10 and top 20. That's what you're looking for when you look at a Jackson Dart or a Will Howard or a Quinn Ewers or a Kyle McCord or a Tyler Shuckley. Those are the guys we're talking about in that range. You've got Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, which also fall into that. But for me, it's very much a sign of, okay, we want to go get a guy that can still help us be competitive now. And we're not tearing this down completely to the studs because of, like you said, Mike Macdonald will have this defense in the top 5, I think, next year. They have a lot of young talent there. It gives you the ability, especially with the contract that he signed, to go out and sign some of these guys you want to keep in-house that are your own homegrown young talent, and also still allow you to get flexible. And if you see something in a trade or in next year's free agency, you can go do it. And it also allows you to still hunt for your QB of the future if Sam Darnold's not it. And that's why when people ask, oh, is he QB of the future now? Because he's so much younger, I say he's the QB of right now. If Sam Darnold goes out and lights it up the next 2 years in Seattle and puts up similar numbers to what he did versus Minnesota and wins a couple playoff games, yeah, there's a good shot Seattle might re-sign him to another deal, because even if they re-sign him to another deal, it will still, when that deal runs out, potentially make him younger than what Geno would have been when Geno signed the deal he was about to sign potentially this offseason. So it'll be very interesting in that regard. But Chris, what do you make of the Clint Kubiak offense and the staff, like you alluded to, that all know each other, that they brought together here in Seattle? Do you think this will be another 1-year situation where Kubiak could be off looking for a head coaching job next year? Or do you think Clint Kubiak's more in that Darrell Bevel type of light where he's going to be here for a few years?
No, I'm not looking ahead to him leaving. I don't see that happening. What I'm looking at is I'm looking at how focused they are on a running game, and they've got like 3 guys on that staff who are specifically focused on running the ball. So you're talking about bringing in Sam Darnold. Well, they're going to protect him. Their whole idea is to protect him with the running game and to not put all the pressure on him like Geno had so much, particularly last year. You want to have a balanced attack. You want to have an attack that allows your quarterback to strike with when people aren't looking. Basically, I mean, this is what Mike Macdonald's whole idea is. He wants people to think that they've got 12 or 13 guys on either side of the ball when they're playing them. So they confuse the defense, confuse the offense. That's his whole MO. That's what he likes to do. So that's what they're going to try to do. They're going to come in and try to be a very physical team. So whatever they're doing on the offensive line, they're going to be. I know they're doing the wide zone and all that, and that's great if that helps all the offensive linemen do their jobs better. And let's see how they build up this running game, because that's what they're intending to do.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to protect Sam, because I don't know, again, if they're going to get the offensive line that everyone's banking for. I think the offensive line will show improvements this year. I really do believe that, because, and this leads me into our next topic of discussion here, John Schneider's future. If this O-line doesn't get better, John Schneider's seat is going to get very uncomfortably warm, I think, going into next year's offseason. And to me, this is very much a make or break for his next contract type of 18 months. Because I look at it as, okay, you've now had to pivot off of Geno and DK, which you weren't anticipating having to do this offseason. You've made the adjustment, the change to Sam Darnold, and you're going to go through this process of the new OC and Clint Kubiak and his staff. If they are still competitive and they win 10 games and they maybe make the wild card, I think John Schneider gets a lot more leeway going forward. And if the offensive line especially shows improvement in that. However, if it bottoms out, I think John Schneider is going to have to answer a lot of critics next offseason. And I think it becomes uncomfortable for him in what his future in Seattle looks like. I've maintained the stance. I think John Schneider's here till the end of his contract. But if things bottom out after this offseason, I think there's a chance that maybe he's not going to finish out his contract here. What are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I do not think he is in danger of losing his job at this moment. The coach that he just hired to replace the coach that basically hired him won 10 games in his first season with a dysfunctional offense. They are trying very hard to fix that offense this offseason. Mike Macdonald, I'm telling you, I've said this before. Mike McDonald's going to win a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. The guy has a very keen football mind, and the guy does not settle for mediocrity of any kind. When he sees something that is not working, he fixes it immediately. Look at last season. They kicked their linebackers to the curb and completely replaced them. They kicked they cut both their kick returners after one screwy game where they were both messed up so much, and they replaced them. So this guy doesn't tolerate losing. He doesn't want to lose. He won 10 games. They didn't make the playoffs because their offense was so dysfunctional. So he completely wiped out that side of the ball. This is fine by me. This whole reset that they're doing, trading DK Metcalf, trading Geno Smith. They brought in a whole new offensive coordinator and staff. They brought in a new quarterback now. They are bringing in some new receivers to go with JSN, and they're going to add some linemen. Ideally, it all comes together the way Mike McDonald sees it. I feel like he is just building it the way he wants it built. John Schneider is helping him. Mike McDonald has a lot more say this year than he did last year, because last year he was just putting his staff together. He was scrambling to get his coaches in place. He had no say in all the personnel stuff. This year he was at the combine. He was at the Senior Bowl. He's involved in the personnel. He's talking to John Schneider about what he wants. This is what I want. Trust me, DeMarcus Lawrence, that's because of Mike McDonald and Durden. That's why they brought him in, because that's what he wants. He's like, we are going to set the edge against the run. We're going to shut down the run early, and we're going to make all these teams one-dimensional, and then we're going to start picking off passes. And that's what Mike McDonald's looking to do there. So I think John Schneider picked a great coach, personally. So I think he did a very good job there. The guy won 10 games with a dysfunctional offense. Let's see what they do this year before we start talking about John's future. I get everyone's really uptight about the offensive line. I haven't liked it forever either. That's how it's been this whole time here. They've never had an above average offensive line the entire time John Schneider's been here. So some people will blame Pete Carroll. That's his fault. But now everyone's like, oh, well, Pete's gone. So it's obviously now it's John Schneider's fault. So whoever's fault it is, it does need to be fixed. And we've already talked about how they need to do it. You have to have talent. You have to bring in guys. You have to use high draft picks on guys. That's how you build good lines. So let's see if he can do something like that this year. And even if he doesn't, if they can, like you said, let's see if the offensive line just naturally develops under this coaching staff. These guys are now a year more experienced, all these young guys they have. Hopefully they're adding to it, but let's see how it all comes together, and let's see what happens next year on offense. And keeping in mind that this is the first year of this offensive group, but we're not going to cut them any slack because of that. They are going to need to perform, because Mike McDonald intends to win playoff games next year. I guarantee it. That's what he wants. That's why he brought in a whole staff that knows each other. So John Schneider he's tied with Mike McDonald, but he sees Mike McDonald's vision and he's trying to help him with it. And let's see what happens this year. Next year, I'll talk to you about if I think John Schneider is going to be in trouble, because I don't think he is in any trouble whatsoever right now.
So I'll say this: anyone that's watching this on Twitter, on YouTube, make sure you guys get your comments in. The Twitter ones will pop up in here, guys. So make sure you get them in so me and Chris can answer some of these coming up here in a few minutes. Chris, my question to you is, do you think if things go well this season and Seattle makes the playoffs, or say they win the division and they make the playoffs and they win a wild card game, do you think that increases the chance, because John will then be going kind of quasi into the last year of his deal, for them to reevaluate that and potentially give him an extension? Because I believe his contract runs out in 2027 after the draft, is how it was specifically built into it. Do you guys think that, or do you think that there's a chance that if things go that way, he could get an extension going forward for another, at least to max out with Mike McDonald's initial contract?
Yeah, I feel like if they win playoff games, at least one, maybe or more, that he's fine, and that Jody Allen will continue with him as the GM. If they're showing advancement, then why would you remove the guy, even if we all have nitpicks about how he actually puts a team together? John Schneider has clear weaknesses. We all know it. We see how frugal he tends to be in free agency. A lot of times just signing guys to these, he basically picks away at their salary cap space by signing all these 1-year guys. Like he's already done a couple of them, this year. That's kind of his standard. His standard is, it's like how he drafts. He likes to have a lot of draft picks, and he just throws a lot of things against the board to see what sticks. That's kind of what he does in free agency as well. He doesn't like to put a whole bunch of eggs into one basket, one guy. And it's few and far between when he signs. Like Dre Jones is the biggest outside free agent he's ever signed, and they tried to get Will Freeze this year with a similar style of contract. It sounds like. So he does try to do those things sometimes, but where he really succeeds to me is in his veteran trades. Look at Leonard Williams; he's a prime example of that. But he's had a couple of colossal misses, like Jamal Adams and Percy Harvin. Those are his historically horrible ones. But in between all that, he's got a lot of really good ones that were either short term or, like Leonard Williams, guys who got extensions after the fact. So to me, John Schneider, he makes up for some of his failings with some of his other strengths. And so you kind of have to take the good and the bad with him. Talked about how where does he rank in the NFL GM ranks? Well, early last season, there was a survey done of like 40 NFL personnel people, like coaches, personnel people, and he was in the top 10. So the front office for the Seahawks, led by him, was in the top 10. And so we could say, well, the team building of the Seahawks has not been top 10 these last few years, but if you put him in the 12, 13, 14 range, I mean, who else is better than what the Seahawks have been doing? And granted, it's not perfect. Certainly, they've had some major flaws. Their defense was a huge mess under Pete Carroll. Well, Mike McDonald fixed that, and John Schneider helped him fix that. And now we're looking at the offensive side of the ball and trying to see if we can fix the offensive line, which is the big flaw there, the big weakness there, and see if we can get rid of that Achilles heel. So let's see if he does some more of his magic that kind of keeps them in contention. And they're always in contention. And I know people don't want to be stuck in the middle, but hey, this is a big reset on offense to try to not be stuck in the middle.
No, I totally agree. It definitely is a massive reset and a directional change, and I think it's the right one. And I hope that John Schneider can get this going with Mike McDonald we are now competing for championships again, because they've been saying it for over a decade, but they really haven't been able to actually show that with what's been put on the field. I'm hoping that now changes with Mike here and his fresh set of eyes, and John's able to reset it and get it going in that direction. But last part of the show, Chris, is our viewer Q&As. And so we've got a few of those that have come in, and we'll start with this one from Ryan over on Twitter. He goes, does Cooper Kupp still fit with the MVS signing?
I know there's a lot of people drawing connections because he's a Washington kid, bring him back home, and clearly the Seahawks are being linked to him. I think he totally could fit, but only at the right price. He's missed 18 games over the last 3 seasons, so you really want to be careful about what kind of contract you're giving Cooper Kupp. I mean, it's totally possible that he goes off for 3 or 4 more years without ever being injured again and just blows up. But I think you're going to see an incentive-heavy contract this year for him, no matter what team signs him. And some team might give him a higher base than the Seahawks are interested in giving him. So don't be disappointed if the Seahawks are not the team that gets him, because they're only going to look at the contracts they've already done. They got a team-friendly deal with Darnold. They got a team-friendly deal with Ernest Jones. They got a team-friendly deal with DeMarcus Lawrence. Pretty much every deal they've done has been team-friendly. So Cooper Kupp, if he comes here, it'll be on the team's terms, basically.
Yeah, I agree here. I think there's definitely a role for Cooper Kupp here. I think, again, he fits in this offense. He's been in it his entirety of his career, so he's going to know it. Yes, the terminology may be different, but his skill set does fit it well. I think there's things JSN can learn from him, because now you're giving JSN essentially the leader role in that room. Having a veteran like a Cooper Kupp in there may, prove to be even more valuable just for the veteran leadership. Again, the injuries are a bit of a concern. So again, the price has to be right in the way they get the contract done. He's from the area. He may want to come here. He also may want to play against the Rams 2 times a year, because they said he wasn't good enough to do it anymore, and get kind of, a little bit of revenge on them. Yep. And again, I think for Cooper Kupp, it's about me. It's going to come down to one of 2 things. Does he want to play at home and somewhere is familiar, not up, uproot his entire family off the West Coast and move somewhere else, like a Detroit or somewhere like that, or a Green Bay? Or is he more concerned about winning a championship? And if that's what's driving him, then he's going to make that decision to go to a Detroit or somewhere that's a bit more ready to be a contender at this point than we are. But Ryan, no, I think there is still room for Cooper Kupp here, even with the MBS signing. So hope that answers. And guys, there's proof for you. The Twitter questions do come through here. So the bunch of you that are watching on Twitter, make sure you throw them in the chat. They will populate over here for us on this side. So let's go to this one here. MWN in here with another one saying, Scandling was a good signing. Would like Hawks to take a flyer on Elijah Moore or Rondell Moore. Then Hawks can go get Jalen Royals or Ao Manera in the draft. I butchered that name completely, and I apologize, guys. I'm still working on some of these guys' names. But, yeah, what is your thoughts on, if they don't get a Cooper Kupp for, say, Chris, an Elijah Moore or a Rondell Moore as another veteran to bring into this room, and then, again, going into the draft and getting someone like a Jalen Royals?
I like the Elijah Moore. He was one of the guys that I had on my short list that I thought would be a good ad for the Seahawks. Somebody who could take over those maybe a little slot stuff, and let's say JSN moves outside, and I think there'd be a good complementary there. And Elijah Moore wouldn't be too expensive either, so he's still out there. I don't know if the Seahawks have an interest in him. We haven't seen anything like that, but I would totally be in on that kind of a move, and I'm definitely in on. There's a lot of different variety of receivers in this draft, and it really comes down to what the Seahawks are looking for, because there are big guys, there are clearly there's some speed guys, but then there's some guys who are just football players. They're just guys who can get open, guys who can high point the ball. There's just a variety of different receivers, so it just really comes down to what they're looking for. And I don't think going to be looking maybe in the first round necessarily, but maybe on day 2 you'll see them get one, and I think that would be a good move.
I agree as well. Like, I think they should add one of these guys. And then for me, there's a couple guys in the draft that stand out. 2 of the guys out of Iowa State, Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel, are 2 guys that I really like and I think would fit well here. I know a lot of people have thrown out the Matthew Golden from Texas. I think you'd have to take him earlier in the draft than in the mid rounds. So that's why I think with the Jaden Higgins, you may get him in the second or late second to third. And Jalen Royals is someone else that I'm really enamored with and think could, again, bring a skill set in here that fits. It's going to be very interesting because the receiver room is going to look extremely different than how it's looked for the past 5 or 6 years with who they're going after, how these guys, fit into the scheme, and, how it's going to look all put together at the end when we get to the regular season. So let's move on to this one here from 6789 Uopa. Free agency didn't address O-line problems, so now it's all on the draft again. I wouldn't go that far yet. I still think they're in play for maybe Tevin Jenkins or one of those, or maybe a Mekhi Becton even. And I think it'll be interesting to see if they miss on one of those guys, like you said earlier, Chris. They may sign some of these guys, that are, maybe a Brandon Sheriff, maybe because Kevin Zeitler's now signed with Tennessee. Get one of these older guys in here and then pivot your main focus to, okay, how do we get a two top level talent players in this draft class for the offensive line?
Yeah, I totally agree. I do not think they're done in free agency. Just because they missed on their top target, they'll look at this second tier of guys and find somebody, maybe the third tier. It might not be somebody that any of us are super excited about, but they think of it this way: the Seahawks never go into the draft without having all of their holes filled. And they might not be filled with ideal guys or guys that are going to be there long-term or anything like that, but they always have a guy for every spot. So they will have that left guard in there. I feel like their right guard, they have so many options in-house. Laumea maybe is probably the guy that they're leaning toward to play right guard. But so I don't think it's you're looking at that side, but you're looking at the left side where Laken Tomlinson was. And maybe Christian Haynes moves over there. There's been scuttlebutt that they move him around somewhere to find him, maybe if he improves enough. But still, they're going to want a veteran, and they should get a veteran. You need veteran leadership on your offensive line. You can't just rely on a whole bunch of young guys to come together who have never or who are just barely starting to play together and don't even know the NFL very well. So and that applies to the draft as well. And I feel like Bryce and I both talked about how they definitely need to add to the interior offensive line in the first 2 days of the draft, ideally the first 2 rounds of the draft, because that's where the talent is, and you need to find one of those guys to add. But in the meantime, they'll also have a veteran. I think you're going to see those 2 things both happen.
And here we got another one from MWM. I'm seeing Trey Brown to the Niners, Stone Forsythe to the Giants. So I guess those are some holes to fill. Well, for the Stone Forsythe one, you have Mike Jarrell in house. They just brought in Josh Jones, who's kind of going to be your young swing tackle to push Mike Jarrell. So they filled that one. The Trey Brown one, though, to the Niners was interesting because I thought they might bring him back, but after they brought back Josh Jobe, who took his job halfway through the season, I'm going to be saying that I think Seattle may leave corner because they feel good with it right now and will get somebody in the draft because they have Nehemiah Pritchett still under contract, who they took last year. Josh Jobe has returned. Witherspoon is still there. Reek Wollen's still there. There's 4 corners right there alone. Seattle may go, okay, we can look in the draft and get somebody. And they may do the typical thing where they bring in Artie Burns during camp as your free agent, veteran minimum guy that you can stash on your practice squad throughout the season like they did last year. I will say, though, I think Trey Brown leaving might not bite Seattle in the ass a little bit, but I think he's going to play very well in San Francisco because I really liked him as a player. I think if he was a little bit taller, he may have had a higher draft grade to him, but for whatever reason, he just fell out of favor last year, it seemed.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is Trey Brown got hurt, and that was his misfortune in the first year of a new staff. So that kind of, and they've already, and Jobe stepped in as the starter on that other side, and they already brought him back. So I think we're looking at the draft maybe to add another guy to this mix, but otherwise you nailed it all. Josh Jones is this new swing tackle that covers the Forsythe thing leaving, and that's that.
So we got Ryan back in here from Twitter. He goes, when will John potentially look at extending Charles Cross? The price is only going to go up. I think it's going to be potentially this year, like halfway through.
Yeah, and there's talk that they're willing to use the 5th-year option on him, which is I think 17 or 18 million, something around there. So the price is for top tackles is about 20. So it will go up. The prices always go up. They always do. That's just how it is. So if they lock in for next year at the 5th-year option, then that buys them time for the contract. But like Bryce just said, pretty good chance that they'll get a deal done before this 2025 season starts and he'll be extended.
Yeah, I agree. So I agree. I think there's a discussion where I think you're going to see Charles Cross potentially, if he starts the season well, they get to that halfway point. John has a tendency when there's, half a season and a year left on a guy's deal to potentially look at extending him. He used to do that with KJ Wright and some of the prior Seahawks that have done it. I think there's a good chance Charles Cross. I will say this. I think there's a higher chance Charles Cross gets an extension than there is for Abe Lucas. I think there's a real chance that they let Abe Lucas potentially play out the year and then go and get, and see what his market is when he gets to free agency and see if they can circle back on him. I think they'll be more focused on locking in Charles Cross.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Abe needs to show that he can play a full season. So they'll let him play it out. But Cross, really good left tackles are hard to find. So they've got one, and they're going to keep him. They're going to pay a guy. They're going to pay a guy.
Exactly. Dan Vians just jumped in. 2 of my favorites. Thank you, Dan. And Dan, also thank you for your $20 super sticker. Really appreciate that, man. You actually are the reason that me and Chris even kind of got together and started doing this. So really appreciate you, Dan, and thanks for tuning into the show. Appreciate you. All right, so we got one from MWM here. Whom do you think the Hawks can get a steal in the later rounds of the draft that we may not be thinking about? Who are some of your late round kind of draft crushes so far, Chris? Do you have any?
Oh, my gosh. I've just barely started looking at it because I was more looking at all the chaos around the Seahawks and kind of what they were going to do. So I can't answer this question right now. That's going to be on you, Bryce.
For me, later round guys, depends where we're looking. If we're looking at, receiver, there's Ricky White, there's Nick Nash. Those are a few receivers you get in the later rounds potentially. The one thing I think you can get a steal in the later rounds in this draft especially is going to be running back. There are going to be some good running backs that end up in rounds 4, 5, 6, 7 that can come in and really compete. And that's a position, I know we haven't really talked about it here, Chris, but Ken Walker's up for a potential contract extension because he's going into year 4. Zach Charbonnet's in year 3, going into year 4 next year. You're going to be looking at potentially having to restock some of your running backs. I think there's a good chance Seattle takes a running back in the mid-rounds. Donovan Edwards out of Michigan, someone I like. Damian Martinez out of the University of Miami. He's another guy that I think, comes in and can play in the system really well. Again, this is going to be very interesting to see. And there's some linemen too. Jackson Slater's another guy to look at. Clay Webb. Those are guys that you can potentially get in the later rounds, mid to late rounds. I think that could be steals. I'm trying to think of anyone else off the top of my head. Those are kind of the guys that really stand out to me that I think are fits in Seattle that aren't maybe being talked about nationally as much. They aren't through Seahawks content creators. I know for a fact Jackson Slater was on one of Dan Vienza's shows, and he did an interview with him. And there's some guys that I've taken into a lot of my mock drafts that are later on. So I know Seahawks content creators are aware of these guys because they fit what we think the Seahawks could go with. And a linebacker I'd throw out there, Jack Kaiser out of Notre Dame is a guy that I think, again, I think Seattle linebacker depth at that position is going to be something they're going to actually maybe go for after in the draft. All right, so we got another one here. WD Ford, having a lot of picks gives you flexibility in the draft. Where do you see John moving up to get an O-line or receiver? Or maybe he's asking, do you think John will do it? Do you think there's a chance John moves up in this draft class? Or do you think this is more of a John may move back even from 18 potentially a few spots and gain another pick? Or do you think now that they've gone in, they have these 5 picks in the top 100, John intends to use all 5 of those picks in that area?
I don't think he would move up for a wide receiver. I don't think there's a guy that they would really be in love with enough to do that. Offensive line, possibly if they really love, for example, Tyler Booker of Alabama, and they feel like he might go like 15 or 14, maybe they'll hop up a few spots for him. Not too far though, and that's what that flexibility of having the twos and the extra 2s and 3s gives you. So maybe if there's an edge guy that they really like, but they just added DeMarcus Lawrence, so they've got 4 edge guys now, assuming they're keeping Nwosu. So, but there is the future to look at, and Nwosu's probably not here beyond this year. Lawrence is a short-term guy as well, maybe 2 years, and also Hall and Mafe are going to go off. They're coming off their rookie contracts too. So you do need to look to the future at edge as well. So I could see them stressing that more than we might think in this draft, which has a lot of good different defensive linemen in it and edge players. So maybe if they love somebody enough to jump up a few spots to get them in the first round, maybe. But I would say I would say more if I had to put money on it right now. John uses all 5 of those picks.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling too. I think John getting those picks, especially that 5 in the top 100, I think you're going to see John be very thorough in what he does. And if he moves at all, I feel like it's because they have such conviction about a player that he thinks is going to be gone that they move up to. I would think if he's going to move any picks, it'll be in the later rounds 4 down. But I think rounds 1, 2, and 3, where they're situated, I think there's a higher chance John just picks guys that he has conviction about there that are going to help this team as soon as possible. So we'll move on to this one here, Chris. MWM again comes in saying not comfortable with Reek Woolen and his security keeping his job. Reek's been an interesting guy his tenure here in Seattle. Everyone loved him as a rookie. He was phenomenal. Him and Sauce Gardner were considered the 2 top young corners in the NFL. And then since that point, Reek's kind of had this up and down kind of career arc here in Seattle. Do you think, because again, he is going to be a guy this year in his last year of his deal. It is year 4 for him, and he was a 2nd or 5th round pick or 4th round pick. Do you think he fits Mike McDonald's scheme? And do you think there's a chance, you look at some of the money these young corners, Lenore got $94 million last year. It's kind of in that range of 100 mil to 90 mil kind of area. Do you think Seattle will fork that money up for a guy that at points through last season, John Schneider mentioned, focus for him, being attentive on cues all the time, a guy that, hurt the team and got sat for the first quarter of a game because he was out partying the night before? Like, do you think Reek fits in here, or do you think there's a chance, even maybe at the draft, that if a team comes and says, hey, we'll give you a 3rd or a 2nd round or something like that because we missed out on a corner we wanted, do you think they have that discussion, or do you think, Reek's kind of safe here?
I'm on record as saying I think they should trade Woolen. I've said it multiple times on Twitter and on my blog and in some posts that were relevant to that. So I don't think his mentality really matches what Mike McDonald likes. And you kind of just outlined a few of the examples of why. And I feel like as we get toward the draft, there's a chance that they might look to move him. And the draft has some good corners in it. So, and they have the draft capital to get a good one on day 2. So I feel like, even though we just talked about, what does the depth of their corner look like? And you said, well, they have 4 guys. I feel like if you trade Woolen, and they're only going to trade him if they get something decent for him. So at least a 3rd rounder, I would say, because he was a 5th round pick. He's a Pro Bowl player. He's been to the Pro Bowl. And he'll be worth that to somebody. If they make the deal, it'll be something like that. So if they can get like a 3rd round pick for him, or, even better, a 2nd round pick, that would be great. A day 2 pick, say. If they get a day 2 pick of any kind, that's a good move for them because they're not going to pay him. They're not going to pay him, so he's going to leave him free agents because they're going to pay Witherspoon instead. Yes. They're not going to pay both guys. So Witherspoon's behind him in his tenure, so he's still got time on his contract. But Witherspoon's Woolen's going to be coming up, and they're not going to pay him. And then if he leaves, the best you're going to get, the best as a comp pick, if it all worked out from your ads and your minuses, is a 3rd round pick. So if you can trade him for that, or even better, a 2nd round pick, then you should do it because you're not going to pay him. So. And that's the same thing. It's a similar thing to what with DK Metcalf. They traded him for a 2. The best they would have gotten if they let him play out his contract this season and he left would be a 3. So they got as good as they could get. They got better than they would get if he just left in free agency. So same thing with Woolen. I feel like Woolen is kind of the next DK Metcalf scenario, and that they need to deal with that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I've been on record saying that I think they should move off of Woolen. I don't see him as a fit in this defense. If you look at the corners that have played at Michigan for Mike McDonald and the guys that played in Baltimore, they're very much more in the Witherspoon mold. They are aggressive. They want to tackle. They want to be physical. Reek isn't about that. Reek's a great cover corner on the deep stuff and wants to play the ball, but Reek isn't really the guy that's going to go in there and throw his body around as much as, say, a Devin Witherspoon. And, I'll go as far as saying this. I think there is a higher chance that we hear Kobe Bryant has a new contract extension and a guy they want to keep, and I think he's higher on their priority list to keep than Reek Woolen is. Because you saw what Kobe Bryant did coming in last year into Mike McDonald's defense and how much he raved about Kobe Bryant once he took over that role from Rayshon Jenkins. Kobe Bryant, I think, is more of a crucial piece to this defense for Mike McDonald than Reek Woolen is.
Yeah, but let's be clear. Woolen has a lot of talent, and other teams will covet that talent. So it's just about fit, like you and I have said. It's about fit, and we don't think that he fits this the Mike McDonald's mentality and his defense, but he might totally be somebody else's jam.
So actually, here's one kind of alluding to that. Do you think the Seahawks will select a cornerback in this draft, possibly even in round 1, 2, or 3? I do think it, depending on how the board falls, I think Seattle's first two priorities are going to be getting at least two players in the trenches early on both sides, whether it's they start D-line and then go O-line, they go O-line and then go D-line. And then I think their next two areas of need will be corner and receiver are the two other areas they'll potentially go with their picks. And then that fifth pick in the top 100 will be, we're going to either throw it back at the O-line and get another guy, or we're going to throw it on the D-line and get another player there. That's kind of how I see that shaping out for Seattle. And I think it all depends on how that board falls. If all of a sudden they start seeing a run on receivers, that may change how they use one of their picks, and they might go receiver sooner than later. But I do think it is a very good possibility Seattle does take a guy more in round 2, later round 2 and round 3 than it is they take a corner in round 1.
I fully agree with everything you just said there. I don't think they would take a corner 1, but day 2, definitely an option. And to me, receiver and corner are positions that they want to. They need receivers now, but they're going to need corners going forward. So that's why you kind of have to balance your draft between the things you need now and the things you're going to need. So back in the day when the Seahawks were a Super Bowl team, they were always drafting what I call drafting ahead, because they were always drafting for the future. They didn't need anybody right now when they had a totally stacked team back in 2012, 13, 14. And so they were always drafting ahead or trading their picks or whatever, because John was it was all funny money to him. It didn't matter. He already had a full roster. So now it's more of a balance of trying to fill some needs like interior offensive line, like adding that nose tackle we talk about, maybe finding but then looking ahead, you're like finding the future edge and finding the future corner that you're going to need. And they also need tight end. We talked about that. So tight end might be a guy they look at on day 2 as well. That's a position I'd throw in there.
MWM here going, Donovan Jackson would be a guy to move up to the top around 2 with the excess 2 and 3 picks. Yeah, I would agree. Donovan Jackson definitely is someone they'd move up. I believe that they're probably weighing out who of the top O linemen will be there at 18 versus who of the top D line will be there at 18. And then how do they think the rest of the board will fall will determine if they make that move up to try and get someone like a Donovan Jackson. Because if there's another guard that they've fallen in love with, or like a Tate Ratledge, they know they can get still at pick 50 and let a guy like a Donovan Jackson go, they may do that entirely. But I do really like Donovan Jackson. He's one of my draft crushes for sure. And this one's from Tan. John Schneider could finally take a QB at 18, either Dart or Sanders falls, have them sit behind Darnold. I don't think Sanders is even on Seattle's draft board. He doesn't, to me, seem to fit the Mike McDonald, John Schneider vibe of how they want this team. There's a lot of off the field kind of things I would be more concerned about. If you look at John's history with that, and they've kind of pivoted away from that in more recent years, going away from those guys ever since. And I think a big part of that too now is Pete being gone. Pete could handle those guys. You look at the Richard Shermans and the Earl Thomases and some of those guys they had to deal with, and the characters. Takes a certain type of coach. I don't know if Mike McDonald is the coach to deal with that stuff.
Yeah, well, Mike's more of a no-nonsense guy. And I'm not speaking to Sanders' personality or anything here, but I would say, yeah, quarterback could possibly, if Dart's there at 18, I don't think Sanders will be. I think he'll be picked higher. But if Dart's there at 18 and the Seahawks really they like him, and then they think, hey, you know what, this is the time to do this, I wouldn't be surprised if they do it. But with John Schneider, he talks about drafting quarterbacks, and so many people are confident or at least optimistic that the Seahawks are going to draft a quarterback this year. But I would not put money on it. If I were betting on this type of thing, I would not put any money on it, because we know John Schneider, he just hasn't done it. And this is kind of a crapshooty draft. I know people like to try to find, hey, there's some hidden gems, there's hidden gems in every draft, but do they ever turn out? It's such a crapshoot to draft quarterbacks. And the question is, does John Schneider have other things he'd rather use his draft picks on than a quarterback? But if Dart's there and they really are feeling it, I wouldn't be shocked by it, but I wouldn't put money on it either.
Here's another one from North. If Seahawks take a QB this draft, who do you think it'll be your top 3 most likely? So my top 3 guys I think fit what they want to do, fit this new Clint Kubiak scheme. Obviously, they've added Sam Darnold, so whoever they're bringing in is going to sit. I really think Quinn Ewers is on that board just because of John's brought him up a few times. He's now working with Mike McCarthy, where we know John has a very, very close relationship with Mike McCarthy. And I feel like if somehow Quinn Ewers, which I think he'll be there day 2, if Mike or John calls up Mike and says, hey, give me the real truth about this. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about taking him. What's the deal? If Mike McCarthy gives the thumbs up on Quinn Ewers, I think you'll see John pull the trigger on that kid. Dart's another one for me that I think fits. And then the one that I would say that, I like a lot, some people aren't so high on, is Kyle McCord. I think Kyle McCord has some things in his game that fit this really well for Seattle. All these guys, though, are projections. And again, like Chris just alluded to, Seattle may not take a quarterback this year. They may pivot and go till next year and ride it out with Darnold and Howell this year, and then look to next year, depending on how Darnold does, to see if they can address it. So those are my top 3 guys, which are Ewers, Dart, and McCord. And we'll see if Seattle takes one of them this year.
I think I'll just say, Dart and Ewers seem like options that the Seahawks might consider, and beyond that, maybe they look 4th, 5th round, and instead of day 2 for a quarterback possibly.
So we got one in here from one of our members, Ian Victor. In my opinion, the Hawks should wait to take a QB in 2026. I'd say trade down to get extra picks if you can get some for next year's draft. Build the foundation first, then a QB after. I agree with the potential that the Hawks could take a look in 2026. There's a better looking class of quarterbacks coming out, which have higher upside in my opinion. The thing for me, though, is I don't know if John will trade down out of 18 because there are so many good linemen and guys that you could plug and play potentially on both sides of the ball there. That, again, his focus is trenches. He needs to address that. You've heard him talk about it this offseason, that he has openly admitted, we know it's a problem. We have to address this problem and fix it. I think that's where you're going to see John stick there at 18. And there's one of those guys that they've fallen in love with in the process for the trenches. That's where they'll stick and take him because of the other 4 picks they have between 2 and 3 in the rounds.
Ian, and I love the comment there. Build the foundation first, then take the QB, because so many failures around the NFL come from doing the opposite of that. They draft the quarterback high, but they don't have the support system for that quarterback. If you look at teams like Baltimore when they drafted Joe Flacco, or Pittsburgh when they drafted Ben Roethlisberger, they had the defense, they had the running game, they had all that support for the quarterback. So I completely agree with what you're saying, is build the foundation. And the Seahawks definitely need to get their offensive line in order and finally put together one that's better than, that's at least average, since they have never had such a thing in the last decade. I tend to think, like I said, I wouldn't put money on them picking a quarterback in this draft, just because maybe one of the things being next year's draft is better for quarterbacks. And so I don't know about the trading down thing. I think what you could see possibly is that Rick Woolen gets traded later in the year, like before the season or something, for a pick next year. I mean, that's a possibility that could happen, and that's how you could add, to next year's draft, is by doing something like that. But I also think he might be traded this year, right before the week of the draft, and then they would add to their picks. But they could also then dump out one, like you're saying, Ian, and for next year, if they got so many, say they have end up with two seconds and 3 thirds because they get a third for Woolen, then they can easily drop one of those and say, hey, we'll give you a 3, you give us next year a 2, and that's a way to add some stock to next year.
Well, Chris, I'll keep you only for a few more minutes here. We'll go till about 8:30. So anyone else who wants to get their comments and questions in, get them in as you can. Jason comes in here and he goes, I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't take a QB this year. They have a lot of picks and not a ton of holes, and QBs take years to develop. Get one in low investment, possible huge upside. I agree. There is a very, very realistic possibility this is the year, Jason. I just think it'll be interesting to hear John Schneider talk on Thursday now, because obviously he will talk to on his John Schneider show, and hopefully they ask him some questions on how he views this quarterback class, how he views the addition of Sam Darnold. Does that change the narrative on what they're looking? And if they like Chris and me have alluded, they've set this back 7 years now with Darnold's age. He's 27 and he's still under 30. So that's a big deal for a quarterback that they may view that they can, push this an extra year. I'm not opposed to taking a quarterback this year. I think they need to start taking bites out of that apple at some point. Like Chris alluded to, John keeps saying he wants to do it and never does, which gives Chris that hesitance that he'll actually ever do it. It'll be interesting to see if they do it, Jason. That's all I'll say on that.
Yeah, agreed. I'd be good with them taking a quarterback too. I always am. I remember, Schneider came from Green Bay, where they used to take quarterbacks all the time, and then they would trade away their third guy and get something good for him. They traded away Mark Brunell, Aaron Brooks, Ty Detmer. I mean, this is back in the day, in the 90s. They traded away a whole bunch of guys, and they always got good picks for him. And that's a commodity. Like if you're doing it right, you can develop these guys behind your starters and make it kind of makes money off of that. So John hasn't done enough of that here. He definitely should have been drafting quarterbacks more than he has. He says it, but then he just doesn't go and do it. So I'm totally with you, Jason, on go ahead and go get a quarterback and try to develop him behind Sam Darnold while Darnold's here. Because if Darnold doesn't work out, maybe that guy that you're developing behind him is the guy. So give yourself a plan A and a plan B. Like this is a huge thing that not enough teams do a very good job of.
And Sam Howell is not plan B. Here we go with Slarty Bugard. Who is the top guard tackle prospect, guard tackle prospect in the draft? Membu. How much better is the number one prospect than others, and how hard would it be for them to trade up for them? I don't know if you need to trade up in this draft to go get Membu. I think is going to go in the top 10. I don't think he'll be there at 18. And if you did want to trade up, I think it would be relatively difficult to get up there without giving up a lot of your capital. But with that being said, I think there's guys on day 2. And if you listen to Jim Nagy, if you listen to Todd McShay, and you listen to some of these draft guys, Daniel Jeremiah, the one thing they have stressed about this draft is it is a meat and potatoes draft, and there is so much depth at O-line and in the trenches on the defensive side this year that you can get good starting level players in round 2 and even in round 3 to come in and play guard, D-tackle, and those kind of spots. So I don't know if Seattle needs to trade up for him. I'd love to get Membu, but I think that they could, if he isn't there, maybe that Tyler Booker falls, maybe one of these other guys, or maybe they just pivot all together and go with a Kenneth Grant at 18 and then come back on day 2 of the draft in round 2 and they go with a Tate Radledge or Wyatt Millam or one of these guys that, even a Gray Zabel, one of those guys that you could potentially get in the second round. So that's where I kind of see it on that situation.
Yeah,
Ryan Young comes in. Any chance you see John Schneider sending 52 and next year's third for the Colts left guard Quentin Nelson? Saw he had a hefty signing bonus on March 17th, so they might want a rebuild. That's an interesting potential there. The only thing I'll say about that is Quentin Nelson kind of anchors that line. Now that they've lost Ryan Kelly and Will Fries there in Indianapolis, I think that he's the only stable thing that they've got there. They just brought in Daniel Jones. I think the Colts are trying to, again, I think they're going to be a team going hard after O-line in the draft. And I think that there's a higher chance that they hang on to a Quentin Nelson than let him walk out the door in a trade. I love the idea, though. I'd be all for it. Believe me. Quentin Nelson in here at left guard with Charles Cross, sign me up for that. There's my, nose grading left guard. I'm happy at that, but I don't know the possibility of it. But I love the thought process, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
What else we got in here? Old school Seahawk. Good to see you in here, man. What are your top receiver and deep tackle prospects? Okay. Do you want to give any of these yet, Chris, or are you still not fully into the draft yet?
You can start off, but I've got some ideas, but go ahead. You lead the way.
So for receiver OSS, I would probably go Jaden Higgins is one of my top receivers, and I'm being realistic here. Like, I know there's McMillan. I know there's M'Baku. I know there's Golden. I just don't think they're realistic. I don't think Seattle's going to get one of those guys because I think most of those guys will be gone in the early part of round 2 or round 1. I'm looking at guys that are going to be in that late round 2, mid-round pick kind of guys. Jaden Higgins is a guy I think could be there in round 2 for them. Jalen Royals is another one for me that I really like. I like Ricky White. Nick Nash is another one for me. Those are kind of some of the guys. Jalen Noel is another one I really like for receiver. On D tackle, Kenneth Grant, huge guy. Love Kenneth Grant. Think he's, an interesting guy that I think fits in Seattle. I also like Jordan Phillips out of Maryland for that big D tackle that, me and Chris have talked about on the show, that they need to get a proper nose tackle in here. The DeMarcus Lawrence signing does change how they look at edge, but there's some edge guys I like. I like the young kid out of UCLA, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name because I'll butcher that. I also like Landon Jackson out of Arkansas is another guy that I like as a D lineman. But for D tackle, really it's Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips for me on the inside there.
I'll just throw out a couple of Texas guys on both of those. Isaiah Bond, the wide receiver of Texas, he's a real speedster guy. And I think he would be kind of add a different element because, Scantling's here just for 1 year. So, bring him in, let him learn the system, and then let him really step into it. So that's a guy I would be interested in. And then Alfred Collins is their defensive tackle there at Texas, who I think could be a late day 2, like a third round type guy maybe that they would and maybe have some interest in for nose tackle. Those are a couple guys have jumped out at me.
The only thing about Isaiah Bond is just his speed didn't come through at the combine as well as it should have for him, and that's the only thing. But then there's game speed versus straight line speed, so it'll be interesting. WD Ford comes in here, guys, and we're only going to go a few more minutes. If the idea was to package picks to move up for a QB in 2026, would JS probably want to get and use a bunch of picks in 2025? This seems to be looking at Darnold for a couple of years, or they seem to be looking at Darnold for a couple of years. Could be the plan. I'm the quarterback question, and I know it's going to be constantly on everyone's mind. I even think if Geno had stayed, it would still have been on everyone's mind. They need to start taking swings. I think they could start this year, and you could still take a guy next year if things don't work out. If you take a guy this year and it's not looking great, then yeah, you could pivot into 2026. And if you fill a lot of your holes this year, then you could move up maybe in 2026 by pushing other draft capital from 27 and 2028 to get up and maybe a player. So I'm not sure what John Schneider's thinking, but I think it's definitely a situation where and the other question is too, Chris, is if they take a QB and he does well, then the third year of Darnold's deal, Darnold is at a very favorable number, and if he's playing well, that you could trade Sam Darnold and get capital for him too.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he's playing well, you probably want to keep him if you're winning playoff games at that point. But I'm all in on the idea of adding quarterbacks. I always have been. And remember, Sam Howell's this is last year of his rookie contract, so he'll be gone after this season most likely. So if he even makes the team, if they draft a guy, he might beat him out. So yeah, you're looking at drafting a guy to try to beat out Sam Howell to be the number 2. But also develop for the future. So this is a year definitely they could look at. I know a lot of people are hopeful and optimistic that they will, but if it's not this year, it's got to be definitely the next year. I mean, one of these 2 years, like Schneider has got to jump in there and start drafting quarterbacks.
Agreed. Plumber AK comes in going Dart, Will Howard, Shuck, and maybe Ewers would be okay with any one of them being drafted. I agree. I like every single one of the guys on the list, and the only other one I'd throw in there too is Kyle McCord, but I'd be okay with any one of those guys getting their name called to be a Seattle Seahawk this year in the draft. MWM, that's a good one. I totally forgot about him. Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I actually just took him in my most recent mock that you guys can find on my Twitter. I took him in the second round. Again, I agree. He's a really tough kid, and I think a really good potential D-line prospect. Could be an interesting guy for the Seahawks to take. But what we'll do is we'll end on that one there, Chris. Chris, what's going on with you over on your Twitter page and your website there at CHAWK TALK? Like, tell the viewers where they can find your stuff and what you got kind of coming up here in the future.
Yeah, those are my that's my handle on Twitter, and just following what the Seahawks are up to and what the NFL's doing. And this is a fun March Madness. It starts with the NFL and ends with the NCAA tournament, right? So to me, March Madness encompasses both sports. And it's always fun. There's a lot of drama, and so I'm on Twitter with that stuff. And then I've been posting on my blog, CHawk Talk, as well. So you can hop on there and see what I have to say in a little more depth if you care. But just adding to the conversation and engaging people. It's all fun stuff.
Yeah, and I love going over there, Chris. I'm constantly checking out your articles and everything over there. So for our listeners, guys, get over there, follow Chris on Twitter. Get into his blog there. Great stuff is always written there. It really brings a lot of insight. Guys, over here on the HawksZone Rundown, we'll probably have another show here or there coming up, depending on any more news that breaks for the Seahawks. And then next week, Tuesday, we will be having Corbin Smith on to come on, talk about the first week of free agency, how he and what he's heard going on with the Hawks. As well, guys, don't forget to subscribe, click the notification button down below. That way you guys are always notified of when our shows come on live and when we drop new episodes. Again, Dana Gorman's show that we recorded last night will be coming out tomorrow. So make sure you guys check that one out. As well, guys, all of our stuff can be found over on Field Goals. We're over there now, me and Ryan, as part of the Field Goals team. So make sure you guys go over there, check out our stuff over there, and check out all the other great work done by the Field Goals crew as well. So that wraps up tonight's show, guys. Go Hawks.